The throne hall of the Carvel Empire was not made to welcome guests, it was made to end hope. The floor was black and smooth like frozen night. Tall pillars rose on both sides, sharp and narrow, stretching so high they disappeared into darkness. Strange alien symbols glowed faintly on the walls, telling stories of conquered worlds and broken species. The air was cold, heavy, and quiet, too quiet. Every sound felt like a mistake. At the far end of the hall sat Queen Zerethal. She was ancient, powerful, and terrifying. Her throne was carved from the remains of a dead starship, taken from a race she had erased centuries ago. Her many silver eyes watched everything at once. Her long claws rested calmly on the armrests, as if nothing in the universe could surprise her anymore. In the center of the hall, far below the throne, knelt a single human. His name was Elias Ward. He was not a soldier anymore. His uniform was torn and burned at the edges. Dried blood stained one sleeve. His hands were bound behind his back with glowing energy cuffs that hummed softly. He had been dragged here, past the bodies of other humans who never made it this far. Elias was the last one. Around the hall stood alien nobles, generals, and priests. They whispered among themselves in sharp, clicking sounds. To them, this human was already dead. This was only ceremony. The queen spoke. Her voice was smooth, deep, and cold, echoing through the massive hall. "Human," she said, "you stand before the end of your species." Elias slowly lifted his head. His face was tired. His eyes were red, not from fear, but from loss. He had seen cities burn from orbit. He had heard the screams over broken radio channels. He had watched the last evacuation ship leave without him. Still, he did not look away. "The human fleets are destroyed," the queen continued. "Your colonies are ash. Your homeworld waits only for my command." The alien nobles watched closely, expecting tears, begging, screaming. Elias swallowed and took a slow breath. "I know," he said quietly. That simple answer caused a ripple of surprise. The queen leaned forward slightly. "Then you understand the meaning of this moment." "Yes," Elias replied. "Good," she said. "You may speak your final plea." Elias closed his eyes for a brief second. He thought of Earth's blue skies, of rain on metal rooftops, of children laughing in underground shelters, pretending the war was a game. He thought of promises he could not keep. When he opened his eyes again, there was pain in them, but also something else, resolve. "I didn't come here to beg," Elias said. The whispers stopped. The silence grew sharp. Several nobles turned their heads toward him, confused. No one spoke to the queen like that. Not unless they wanted to die faster. The queen's eyes narrowed. "Explain," she said. Elias shifted slightly on his knees, the cuffs biting into his wrists. His voice remained calm, though his heart pounded hard in his chest. "My people are already dying," he said. "Begging won't change that." The queen studied him carefully, as if seeing him for the first time. "You are aware that I can end you with a thought," she said. Elias nodded once. "Yes, and still you choose defiance?" "No," Elias replied softly. "I choose honesty." The word echoed strangely in the hall. He looked around at the alien court, then back to the queen. "Humans are not heroes," he said. "We made many mistakes. We hurt each other. We almost destroyed ourselves before we ever reached the stars." The nobles listened now, curiosity replacing boredom. "But we learned something along the way," Elias continued. The queen rested her chin on one clawed hand. "And what lesson could a dying species possibly teach me?" Elias met her gaze. "How to stand," he said, "when everything else is already gone." The throne hall, built to crush hope, felt suddenly uncertain. And for the first time in centuries, the alien queen did not interrupt a prisoner. She listened. The hall remained quiet, but the tension had shifted. For centuries, no human had dared speak to Queen Zerethal like this. No one had dared to meet her eyes without fear. And yet here was Elias Ward, kneeling before her, speaking of weakness without shame. The nobles whispered among themselves, the sharp clicks of their language filling the cold air, but the queen herself said nothing. She simply watched. "Do you think this will save you?" she asked finally, her many silver eyes gleaming like shards of ice. Her voice carried both curiosity and amusement, a mixture unfamiliar to humans. "Your fleets are ashes. Your colonies are gone. You are nothing but a shadow on the history of the galaxy." Elias did not flinch. He did not tremble. His chest rose and fell slowly, as if he were holding the weight of worlds in his lungs. "I know," he said softly. "We are broken. That is the truth. And yes, we are shadows, but even shadows leave marks." The queen leaned closer. "Marks?" she repeated. What marks could a dying species possibly leave? What could humans, frail and weak, leave behind that would matter? Elias swallowed, a quiet tremor in his throat. He thought of the children buried in rubble, of cities that would never sing with laughter again, of fathers and mothers who had died so that others might live. And yet, in that darkness he saw something else, a spark that had refused to die, a stubbornness woven into the human spirit. "We leave lessons," he said, his voice growing firmer. "Not for ourselves, perhaps, but for anyone who comes after. Every mistake we make, every failure we survive, it becomes a story, a warning, a guide. That is how we endure." The queen's eyes flicked toward the nobles. They shifted uneasily under her gaze. They had been trained to expect fear, despair, surrender, but this human gave them none of it. His words were simple, almost fragile, yet carried a weight they could not ignore. "You speak like a poet," the queen said, though no warmth touched her words. "Poems do not stop extinction. They do not rebuild worlds. They do not save a species." Elias nodded slightly, acknowledging the truth. "No," he said. "Poems cannot save us. But people can. People endure. People fight. People remember. That is our power. Not strength. Not weapons. Not fleets. We endure when nothing else remains." The queen's claws drummed lightly on the armrest of her throne. She had conquered stars, erased civilizations, and crushed rebellion across 7 systems. No species had ever faced her and spoken with such clarity, such quiet defiance. And yet, she felt something stir a ripple of something unfamiliar in her chest, curiosity, and perhaps a hint of fear. "Tell me," she said, voice low, almost a whisper. "If your species is so broken, why do you continue to speak? Why do you refuse the shame of your defeat?" Elias closed his eyes briefly, letting memories of war and loss flood him. He saw his fallen comrades, the faces of children who would never grow old, the smoke rising from destroyed cities. Pain, despair, failure all pressed against him. And yet, he opened his eyes, looking directly at her. "Because even in the ruins," he said, "there is something worth protecting. Even when everything is lost, someone has to stand. Someone has to bear witness. Someone has to say, 'We were here, and we tried.'" The queen's pupils narrowed, her many eyes reflecting both disbelief and fascination. "Witnesses do not challenge empires," she said. "They vanish quietly, leaving nothing behind but stories for the survivors." "And yet," Elias whispered, leaning forward slightly despite his chains, "we fight. Not because we expect to win. Not because we think we will survive. We fight because it matters that someone sees us, remembers us, learns from us. That is what humans do. They fight so that tomorrow may have a chance, even if we do not." For the first time in centuries, the alien queen felt an emotion she had never allowed herself to name. She tilted her head, considering him, considering his words, considering the audacity of a single human kneeling in her throne hall, unbroken, And in that silence, Elias Ward had done something that no weapon, no fleet, no empire could do. He had made her listen. The court remained still, watching, waiting. But something had shifted. The air that had always carried the scent of fear now hummed with tension, anticipation, and the faintest taste of something dangerous. The Queen's voice came again, smoother this time, almost curious. You speak of endurance, and yet your species is finished. What do you hope to achieve with words, human? Elias looked up at her with quiet determination. I hope, he said, to show you that even when everything is lost, humans do not surrender. For the first time, the hall that had been built to crush the spirit of countless civilizations seemed unsure, and that uncertainty would be remembered. The throne hall had grown colder, though the air was already bitter with fear. Alien nobles leaned forward, their multi-jointed limbs tense, their eyes flicking nervously between Queen Xyrathal and the human kneeling below her throne. They had witnessed countless species die quietly before her. They had seen empires crumble. They had never seen defiance like this. Elias Ward remained still, his back straight, his eyes locked on the Queen's silver gaze. His wrists burned where the energy cuffs held him, but he did not flinch. Each second in that hall, each breath, was a choice. One misstep, one wrong word, and he could die instantly. Yet he refused to look away. The Queen's voice was sharp, cutting through the hall like a blade. You dare to lecture me, human? You dare speak of endurance while your species is nothing but ash and memory? Elias shook his head slowly. I am not lecturing. I am reminding you of something you do not understand. His voice was calm, low, almost a whisper, but it carried through the massive hall. You think humans fear death. We do not. Death has been with us since the day we learned to walk. It has followed our fathers, our children, our cities, our skies. We have buried generations, and yet we remain. The nobles murmured among themselves. Such words were unthinkable, almost blasphemous. Fear was supposed to be the first and only reaction. Humans were supposed to plead, beg, and break. Yet this one human spoke with quiet clarity, even pride. The Queen stepped forward, her presence a shadow that swallowed him whole. Her towering form seemed to stretch the walls of the hall itself. Then what is your meaning? She demanded. Do you claim humans are strong? Do you claim we have underestimated a dying race? Elias met her shadow with a steady gaze. Not strong, he said, but persistent. Persistent in ways you do not see. You have destroyed our fleets, shattered our colonies, taken our homes, yet each attack only teaches us more. Every loss becomes a lesson. Every failure sharpens us. We do not surrender because surrender is meaningless. We endure because endurance is the only way to protect the future. A hush fell over the court. The Queen's eyes narrowed, reflecting something unfamiliar. Curiosity, and perhaps the faintest tremor of doubt. You are saying, she said carefully, that even in defeat, you continue to fight? Yes, Elias whispered, leaning slightly forward despite the cuffs. We fight not to win, but so that someone else might have a chance. We fight so that tomorrow is possible. You cannot kill humanity by destroying us today, because humanity is never just one person, one ship, one world. Humanity is a spark that passes from hand to hand, generation to generation. The Queen paused, her silver eyes scanning the room. The nobles shifted uneasily. Whispers of disbelief spread through the ranks. She had ruled for centuries. She had crushed species that thought themselves immortal. And yet, here was one human, kneeling, fragile, yet terrifying, speaking of defiance in a way that resonated with something primal she had never known. You think words will save your species? She asked, her voice lower now, almost a whisper to herself. Elias's lips curved slightly, though not in a smile. No, he said. Words alone cannot. But words, combined with action, with courage, with memory, they create a legacy. Even if we fall, we teach the universe that we cannot be erased easily. That is our gift. That is our weapon. The queen felt a shiver in her chest. Her claws, long and silvered, tapped lightly on the armrest of her throne. She had conquered countless civilizations, yet none had made her feel this uneasy. This human, fragile and alone, carried something far more dangerous than fleets or weapons: hope. Elias lowered his voice even further, leaning just enough to make the queen notice. You cannot understand us, not fully. You see the present. You see the destruction. You see only what is gone. But humans, we live in the spaces between. In the moments no one watches. In the shadows of failure. And in those spaces we grow stronger than you think. For a moment, silence reigned. Not the usual tense silence of fear, but a different kind, one heavy with potential, with realization. The queen, who had destroyed planets without mercy, felt something stir in her heart that she had thought long dead. And then she whispered, "What did you just say, human?" The words carried more weight than any command. They were not anger, nor curiosity, nor amusement. They were a crack in the armor of centuries of certainty. Elias met her gaze directly. "I said," he replied softly, "humans don't fight to survive. We fight to make sure someone else can live. Even when we are gone, our actions echo. Even in our death, we leave the universe a choice." The queen blinked, unheard of for someone of her kind. The whisper had shifted the balance. She, the conqueror of worlds, had been shaken not by fire or blade, but by the quiet defiance of a single human, for the first time. The hall, built to crush the spirit of countless civilizations, held its breath not in fear, but in awe. And in that silence, Elias Ward became something far greater than a soldier. He became a warning, a spark, a story that the universe would never forget. The queen stared at him, and in that gaze, the first seeds of fear were planted. The throne hall seemed to shrink around them. Shadows flickered across the black crystal pillars, as if the building itself had paused to listen. The alien nobles whispered nervously, their clicking languages tense and uncertain. They had watched species die quietly for centuries, yet this human, kneeling and chained, spoke with a calm they could not understand. Elias Ward's wrists ached where the energy cuffs bit into his skin, but he did not move. His voice was steady, soft, yet carried through the hall like fire. "You believe destroying us will end humanity," he said. "But you misunderstand. You are not killing a species. You are awakening one." The queen's silver eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward, her towering form looming over him like a shadow that could swallow planets. "Awaken? You are a dying breed, human. What could possibly awaken in the ashes?" Elias lifted his head slowly. "We do not awaken in victory," he replied. "We awaken in struggle, in loss, in despair. Every time we fall, we learn. Every time we lose, we adapt. That is our true weapon." The nobles shifted uncomfortably. Weapons and fleets were predictable. Strategy could be measured. But endurance, defiance, the refusal to break, that was something alien minds could not calculate. "You speak of adaptation," the queen said, her voice low and dangerous. "Explain. Show me how your species could possibly challenge the Carvel Empire in your current state." Elias's eyes, tired but burning, met hers. "You destroyed our fleets, shattered our colonies, left our worlds in ruin. But in doing so, you gave us something priceless: time. Every attack you made, every world you erased, it bought the rest of humanity a chance to prepare, to learn, to remember. Your victories teach us how you fight." The court fell silent. Even the nobles' whispering seemed to pause. They had expected fear, despair, pleading, but not this. Not calm clarity. Not courage so unshakable that it became almost frightening. The queen's voice dropped to a whisper. You dare speak as if my empire has done you a favor? Elias did not flinch. He leaned slightly forward, though his chains held him in place. I do not call it a favor, he said. I call it preparation. Humans survive not because we are strong. We survive because we learn. Every failure, every loss, every wound teaches us. And one day, it will teach the universe something it will never forget. The queen's eyes widened slightly. No species had ever spoken to her like this, and she had ruled for centuries. She had destroyed the proud, the clever, the defiant. And yet here was a human, broken and alone, challenging her with nothing but words. You are bold, she said, voice sharp. Perhaps foolishly so. Tell me, human, what do you hope to achieve? That words alone will save your species? Elias shook his head. No, words are not enough. But words combined with action, courage, and memory. They become a weapon stronger than fleets, sharper than claws, and deeper than any empire's reach. That is what humans carry. That is what makes us dangerous. Not our numbers. Not our ships. Our spirit. Our refusal to vanish quietly. The queen's claws tapped lightly on the armrest of her throne. She had destroyed countless worlds, crushed empires, and silenced resistance, yet a shiver ran through her chest. She had never felt fear like this, not of strength, not of fleets, but of a simple, unbroken truth. Elias leaned forward again, eyes bright despite exhaustion. You believe you hold all power. You believe we are fragile, weak, finished. But every death you cause, every world you burn, you strengthen us. Because humanity does not just survive. We endure, and endurance. Endurance lasts longer than empires. For a long moment, the queen said nothing. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Even the whispers of the nobles quieted into uncertain murmurs. The human spoke softly, yet every word struck like a hammer on stone. You cannot erase us, Elias said, his voice almost tender now. You cannot erase what we carry inside. Courage, memory, hope. That is humanity's true weapon. You can destroy us today, but we will teach the next generation to rise stronger. We fight not for ourselves, but for everyone who comes after. The queen's many eyes flickered, reflecting light like shards of ice. She had crushed civilizations, yet she felt something shift inside her, an unease that she could not name. Fear, perhaps. Not of what humans were, but of what they might become. And in that moment, the throne hall, built to break spirits, trembled not from power or rage, but from the weight of one simple truth. A species that refused to die quietly was far more dangerous than one that conquered worlds. Elias Ward remained kneeling, chained and worn, yet unbroken. And for the first time in her life, the alien queen realized that words, when carried with courage and defiance, could shake even the strongest empire. The hall was silent, but it was a silence filled with danger, anticipation, and something far worse than fear for the Carvel Empire, the possibility that humanity would rise again, for centuries. Queen Zirathal had ruled without question. She had crushed empires, erased civilizations, and silenced every species that dared oppose her. Yet now she found herself unsettled. Not because of strength, not because of numbers, but because of the human kneeling before her, speaking with a clarity and defiance she could not dismiss. Elias Ward's wrists were raw from the energy cuffs, his uniform torn, his body exhausted. And yet, his eyes burned with a quiet fire that refused to dim. The whispers of the alien nobles grew louder, nervous, uncertain. No one had ever stood before the queen like this. And that uncertainty spread through the court like wildfire. You speak as if humanity has purpose beyond survival, the queen said, her voice low, almost a hiss. Explain this to me, human. Why fight when extinction is certain? Why resist when the universe has already decided your fate? Elias lifted his chin, meeting her gaze without flinching. Because there are things worth fighting for, even if we cannot survive to see them. Because the future does not belong to those who are strongest, it belongs to those who refuse to give up, even when everything is lost. The queen's many eyes narrowed. She had ruled countless worlds, seen countless species wiped out. Yet no one had ever spoken to her like this. Not with pleading, not with bargaining, but with calm truth. She leaned closer, and the shadows of her immense form fell over him. And what is this future worth to humans? Elias's voice softened, carrying the weight of memories and dreams long buried. It is worth the child who will never know war. It is worth the families who rebuild in silence. It is worth the laughter that will echo after the fighting ends. We do not fight for glory or for ourselves. We fight so that someone else may live, may see tomorrow. The nobles shifted uneasily, some clicking in confusion, others in disbelief. To them, survival had always been measured in strength and conquest. Yet here was a human speaking of hope, of endurance, of legacy, as if it were the sharpest weapon in existence. Queen Zirathal's voice softened almost imperceptibly. You speak as if humanity is more than it is. You are weak, scattered, broken. What makes you think your defiance matters? Elias leaned slightly forward, despite the pain in his body. Because even in weakness, humans endure. Every failure teaches us something. Every loss sharpens us. Every death inspires those who survive. You think you hold all the power, but power alone does not make a species immortal. Spirit does. For the first time, the queen felt a strange tightening in her chest, a sensation she had not experienced in centuries. She had never feared the strong, the cunning, or the mighty. But she felt something now, something alien and unmeasurable stirring within her. You are brave, she said quietly, almost a whisper, yet it carried through the hall. Perhaps foolishly so. Why do you risk everything, human? Elias's gaze did not waver. Because someone has to stand. Because even if we fall, we leave lessons behind. Because endurance lasts longer than empires. We do not fight to survive ourselves. We fight to make sure the universe remembers that hope cannot be destroyed. The queen's claws tapped lightly on the throne. Every beat was a reminder of the power she wielded, yet each tap echoed differently, now echoed with doubt. She had ruled civilizations that thought themselves immortal, yet none had shaken her like this single human. None had dared speak truth without fear, without expectation. Without compromise. You speak as if humans are immortal, she said softly, almost to herself. Yet you are so fragile, so temporary. Why should I believe that your species can endure what I have brought upon you? Elias's voice dropped, carrying both pain and quiet fire. Because we have nothing else to do but endure. When every world is lost, every fleet destroyed, every home burned, we endure. And endurance lasts longer than empires. The court fell silent again. The nobles dared not speak. They had learned long ago that the queen's attention was final. But even she seemed uncertain. For the first time, the emperor of fear and silence felt a shadow of unease. Queen Zirathal turned her many eyes inward, reflecting on the human's words. For centuries, she had destroyed without remorse. And yet, this human, chained, exhausted, kneeling, had shown her something no weapon, no fleet, no conquest ever had: courage, hope, legacy, and that courage. That quiet fire ignited a fear deeper than death itself, not fear of a species, but fear of what that species could become. For the first time in her life, the alien queen realized that humanity was dangerous, not because of what it could destroy, but because of what it refused to surrender. And in that realization, the balance of power shifted ever so slightly. Though no one yet dared speak it aloud, the throne hall was still. Even the echoes of the alien noble's whispers had faded into silence, leaving only the soft hum of the energy restraints around Elias's wrists. For centuries, no species had survived an audience with Queen Zirathal. None had ever left her throne hall alive after defiance. Yet now, the air was heavy with something else: uncertainty. The Queen's many eyes studied Elias, her gaze sharp, yet strangely thoughtful. He was only a human, frail and broken by every measure of strength she valued. But there was a fire in him, a truth that refused to bow. For the first time in centuries, the Queen saw not a subject, not a prisoner, but something far more dangerous, a spark. "You have spoken enough." "Human," she said, her voice calm yet weighted with authority. "I have listened. I have judged. And I find something unusual." Elias's chest rose and fell slowly. He had no hope left, not in survival, not in mercy. And yet, he had a strange expectation in his heart, a belief that perhaps, just perhaps, the human spirit could be seen even here, among monsters. The Queen rose fully from her throne. Her presence seemed to fill the hall entirely, a shadow stretching to every corner. The nobles leaned back, uncertain, feeling the shift in power, the change in the air. They had seen her punish entire species with a thought, erase worlds without hesitation. And yet now, she paused. "Release him," she commanded. Gasps rippled through the court. The words were unthinkable. No human had ever been granted freedom in her presence, not after defiance, not after kneeling in chains. The guard's claws hesitated as the Queen's words fell like thunder in the cold hall. Slowly, the energy cuffs disengaged, and the chains fell from Elias's wrists. He rubbed them instinctively, stunned, as his gaze met the Queen's. "You may return to your people," she said, her voice steady, yet almost hesitant. "Tell them this: if humans rise again, they will not rise alone." Elias felt a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. Years of fear, loss, and hopelessness had led him to this moment. And now, standing free, he realized that humanity had been given more than survival. They had been given a warning. He bowed not in submission, but in respect. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of 100 fallen worlds. The Queen's gaze lingered on him, unblinking, unreadable. There was power in her posture, authority in every movement. Yet beneath it all, a new emotion crept into her thoughts. Something she had never felt: caution, respect, and perhaps fear. "You have shown me something I have not seen in centuries," she said quietly, almost to herself. "A species that does not fear death, that accepts it, and yet continues. A species that fights not to survive, but to give the future a chance. That is unusual, human. Dangerous even." Elias swallowed. He had no reply for that. Words had carried him this far, but he had learned that sometimes silence spoke as loudly as any defiance. As the guards escorted him out of the hall, the nobles looked at each other, whispering anxiously. They had expected a death, a display of terror, a reminder of the Queen's absolute power. Instead, they had witnessed something no one would forget: the survival of one human against the greatest conqueror in the galaxy. And the Queen, seated again on her throne, whispered words only she could hear. Words that would linger in the Empire long after humans had disappeared from her view. "A species willing to die for tomorrow is more dangerous than one that lives only for today." The hall seemed to hold its breath. The whispers of the nobles faded into the shadows, and for a moment, time itself felt uncertain. The Queen had ruled through fear, through strength, through absolute domination. But she had never ruled against hope. And now she knew. As humans returned to the stars, as they carried their defeat and their lessons, that she had underestimated something fundamental about them. She had faced fear countless times, but she had never faced endurance like theirs. And that realization, quiet and sharp, cut deeper than any weapon ever could. Outside the hall, the stars waited silently. Humanity would return to them, scarred, battered, but unbroken. And somewhere in the vast galaxy, the alien queen began to understand the truth. Defiance, courage, and hope could be far more terrifying than fleets or empires. Elias Ward walked out, free for the first time in weeks, carrying not just himself, but the legacy of a species that refused to vanish quietly. And the universe, ever watchful, would never forget the day a human whispered back at a queen and survived. Years passed, but the memory of that throne hall never left Elias Ward. Every night, he thought of the queen's silver eyes, the cold weight of the black crystal pillars, and the silence that had almost broken him, but hadn't. Humanity had survived, against impossible odds, and not because of fleets or weapons, but because of endurance, courage, and the unyielding fire in its people. Across the galaxy, human colonies rebuilt slowly. Cities rose from the ashes, not with grand displays of power, but with quiet determination. Engineers repaired ships, farmers replanted land, and teachers told stories of those who had fought, those who had fallen, and those who had refused to give up. Every S